going to start here, and we're talking about the benefits of discernment. When it was King Solomon who asked for the wisdom of discernment, and the reason for that was he's like, how am I going to judge this great people of yours? There's so many of them. I'm new. I'm inexperienced. This is what I need. And God was so pleased that he chose this that, you got the mic. Thank you. He was so pleased that he chose this that he says, I'm going to give you what you didn't ask for. I'm going to give you wealth. I'm going to give you position, long life, and to be at peace with all of your enemies. So if I could get someone to read these two off the chart, that would be great. The ability to interpret the law and understand it, and the skill to execute the law with justice. Go ahead, Daniel.
1 Chronicles 22:12. May the Lord give you discretion and understanding when he puts you in command over Israel, so that you may keep the law of the Lord your God. 13. Then you will have success if you are careful to observe the decrees and laws that the Lord gave Moses for Israel. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid of or discouraged.
Excellent. So the Constitution that we have in the United States, the Bill of Rights, what is the legislature, what is the executive office, and what is the courts all trying to do with that? And we're only looking back at it 200 years ago. They're trying to correctly discern or interpret the law, the intent behind the law, the spirit of the law. And for us, we're looking back 2,000-3,000 years on the law of Moses, not being the same ethnicity, not living in that country. None of those things are close to us, it seems, and yet God's brought it near to us by bringing his word to all the Gentiles. So it gives us the ability, with having discernment, to interpret the law correctly. And the next one is 2 Chronicles 9:8.
Praise be to the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and placed you on his throne as king to rule for the Lord your God. Because of the love of your God for Israel and his desire to uphold them forever, he has made you king over them to maintain justice and righteousness.
Okay, so the strange thing about this is that, our president only has the power over the judicial system in what way? They can appoint justices, exactly, Rob. The Supreme Court justices, and I think Circuit Court, can be chosen by the president. What else can the president do with the courts? He can pardon, right? He has the presidential pardon. That's it. Back then, they were to be able to execute justice. For our culture, it seems strange that the ecclesia would ever have that responsibility or power, but that's where it lies now. So we're going to go on to the next one, which is the knowledge of how to maintain peace in their kingdom, is from 1 Kings 5:12. I guess Jason's going to read.
1 Kings 3:12?
5:12.
5:12. I see 5:4 and 10:19.
You read those two that are there on the top, right?
Okay. Oh, I see 5:12. Sorry, my vision. The Lord gave Solomon wisdom, just as he had promised him. There were peaceful relations between Hiram and Solomon, and the two of them made a treaty. And 1 Kings 5:4, but now Jehovah my God hath given me rest on every side. There is neither adversary nor evil occurrence.
Yeah, so when you are able to maintain this justice, you're also the king's job is to maintain the peace and to represent the government in times of war. But his job as king is to maintain the peace. So peace first, and if you have to, go to war. The prophets were there to enhance their vision for the future, and the priest was to maintain righteousness. And eventually, Christ is the priest, prophet, king, which does all three. He maintains the vision for the future, he maintains the peace, and he maintains the righteousness. The next one is from 1 Kings 10:9, and that's the expertise to maintain righteousness in the kingdom. Can I get another reader for that?
Yep. 1 Kings 10:9, praise be to the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and placed you on the throne of Israel. Because of the Lord's eternal love for Israel, he has made you king to maintain justice and righteousness.
Right. So they may seem like little things to you, but these are huge things, and we don't have it in our own land, nor does hardly any other government on earth right now. So the last one is the acumen to unify a country and to maintain power and authority. So that does take a lot of skill. Are we the United States of America or the divided states of America? we're really, because of the extremism that's in the press all the time, it's tearing the country apart, as it has done many times before and will again. So can I get a reader for 1 Kings 8?
And let these my words wherewith I have made supplication before Jehovah be nigh unto Jehovah our God day and night, that he maintain the cause of his servant and the cause of his people Israel, as every day shall require, that all the peoples of the earth may know that Jehovah is God, there is none else. Let your heart therefore be perfect with Jehovah our God, to walk in his statutes and to keep his commandments, as at this day. So Solomon held the feast at that time, and all Israel with him, a great assembly from the entrance of Hamath unto the brook of Egypt before Jehovah our God, 7 days and 7 days, even 14 days. On the 8th day he sent the people away, and they blessed the king, and went into their tents joyful and glad of heart for all the goodness that Jehovah had shown unto David his servant, and to Israel his people.
Is there ever one of the holidays that the Lord has instituted where the people celebrated it and went home sad? Can you all find an example for me? Or miserable, or macabre, or any of those things? Every time they went to one of these festivals and they celebrated the Passover or any of the other things, it always says in Scripture, and they went home joyfully, glad of heart for the goodness of Jehovah. Only when they worshipped other gods did that not happen.
When they did consecrate the new temple, the second temple after Solomon's, the people that had seen the first temple did cry when they saw the new temple, because it wasn't anything like the old temple. It wasn't nearly as good.
That wasn't a festival, but you're right. I understand what you're saying. But it wasn't one of the festivals of God. They had just finished the construction. Yeah. So it's just important to know how to unify a country and maintain its power and authority is by constantly bringing them together and celebrating to the Lord together. Worshiping together is a uniting force. Do we recognize that in our own community?
When we leave here each week, we should feel energized and refreshed and feel good. I mean, if we don't, then something's wrong either in the ecclesia or with us.
Right.
Or maybe both.
I just think it's never really seen as, this is some of the way that Solomon and David maintained unity within the government and within the people, is by worshiping with them, not just exclusively by themselves. So those are some things to think about. Number 6 is to gather the external respect and adoration of the surrounding nations. So with this one, read verse 20 and 21, then skip down to verse 24, okay? So it's 20, 21, then 24 to 25.
Judah and Israel were many as the sand, which is by the sea in multitude, eating and drinking and making merry. And Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the river unto the land of the Philistines, unto the border of Egypt. They brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. And then 24, for he had dominion over all the region on the side, the river from Tipsah even to Gaza, over all the kings on the side of the river, and he had peace on all sides round about him. And Judah and Israel dwelt safely, every man under his vine and under his fig tree, from Dan even to Beersheba, all the days of Solomon.
So this was always the promise, is that there would be a kingdom of priests. And I always tell people to remember, I guess it's like this, is 630 or what have you, is that it's the Euphrates, which is horizontal, to the Nile, which was straight south. So that sector of land was all going to always belong to them at some time, from the Euphrates to the Nile. And it says he did reign in that whole area during that time. And so that is another one of the benefits of discernment, is your influence and power expand as you go, because the more discernment and wisdom you have, the better you are at administration and keeping things together. So then the last one is the wealth to launch major capital improvement projects that were paramount to building the Lord's temple. So because there was peace, and you're not wasting money on war and building weapons and training thousands of people, you can concentrate on the really important things, which to me is always not war. It's building up what you have, building the aqueducts, building the temple, building civic buildings. And this was the time he had to improve all of those things in the land, which is another benefit of discernment. The same thing applies to the ecclesia. So I'm going to bring it home to us. And fortunately for us right now, we don't have these issues. But a lot of ecclesias who are divided and have strife, they're always spending all their time in this world of strife, just like a country at war. All your resources, all your energy, all the stuff is going to the conflict, and it sucks it all away. Whereas if you're living in harmony and unity, you can build. And that's what I've loved about this ecclesia. You've got committees for everything. We're doing things for outreach, for inreach, for this and that, because we're not striving against each other. So all that wasted energy is gone, and we're actually doing something worthwhile with it. But I just want you to think about, when you're at peace, what do you have the ability to do? And that's definitely what Solomon was doing here. Do we read 1 Kings chapter 6 yet? Jesse, I think they're coming to you.
And it came to pass in the 480th, let me use my glasses, year after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month Ziv, which is the 2nd month, that he began to build the house of Jehovah. And in the 11th year, in the month Bul, which is the 8th month, was the house finished throughout all the parts thereof, and according to all the fashion of it. So he was 7 years in building it. Next one too?
Yeah.
And Solomon was building his own house 13 years, and he finished all his house.
Right. So almost 500 years after they came into the land is when the temple gets built. They start building in the 480th year, and it's creeping up towards 500 years when they actually finish it. So why wasn't this done before? Mainly because David was the first one who had it in his heart to do this. All through the Joshua's time, what were they doing? Wandering, but conquering the land. So you were at war the whole time under Joshua. Then in Judges, what's going on for those 200 some odd years? They're constantly going through the cycle of rebelling and then being occupied and having a judge, and the judge relieving them of the oppression. All that wasted energy. Same thing with Joshua. It wasn't wasted energy, but they had to conquer the land. It wasn't until you get to the very end, when you get the last judge, which is Samuel, to set up a king, and then it's during the administrations of David and Solomon that all these major projects are done. So how it translates into an ecclesia is how much you can get done when there's discernment and there's peace and unity. Okay, so let's put the formulas together, which is God is saying to maintain discernment and justice equals peace, righteousness, and unity. But man's formula is very different. It is to ignore justice, do it my way, and it leads to strife, division, and unrighteousness. Yes?
All right, the Bible says it took 20 years for Solomon to build a temple and his own house. He was king for 40 years. These foreign wives took him away. Did that mostly occur in the last 20 years of his reign?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah. And that's in First Kings 11, isn't it? Right? Yep, I believe so.
Just an observation, a question. Why did it take him twice as long to build his house as it did to build God's house?
I hope it wasn't because it was grander, but who knows? I mean, I don't know what his palace looked like. I don't have any idea. Does anybody have an answer to that? Jesse?
The temple was a single-purpose building,
Mhm.
and it didn't have to be as big as a king's palace that had to have all those things that we know he had.
The other answer might be too, is that David had done all the preparations during his lifetime for the temple, and Solomon had to go get his own materials and do all the rest of it for his. So that's another way of looking at it. All right. So this is when when Solomon was asking for discernment. And I just think it's interesting how he presents himself to God and what his desire is to have the ability to do. Can I get a reader for 1 Kings chapter 3? Or to you, Brian. It's up on the board.
I'll just read that then. Now the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask, what shall I give you?" And Solomon said, "You have shown great truth in righteousness. You have shown great mercy to your servant David my father, because he walked before you in truth, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart with you. You have continued this great kindness for him, and you have given him a son to sit on his throne, as it is this day. Now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king instead of my father David. But I am a little child, I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people whom you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to be numbered or counted. Therefore give to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours?"
Very powerful formula that is presented here, because Solomon does not come to God and say, "I am the son of your great King David," da 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 da. He is very humble, and he says, "I'm like a little child. I don't know how to come in or go out." So he is saying, "I don't have this wisdom." And we always think he had it, but at the beginning, he's got the most important seed of all of this, which is the fear of the Lord and humility. And he says, "How am I going to do this job? Because it's such a vast people, and I need to know between good and evil." Discernment. Yes, Casey.
I think what he's also showing here is a serving heart.
Mm-hmm.
He's not looking at this and saying, "Oh, I'm king. I can do what I want. Never mind everybody else and what's true and fair." He's coming at it from the perspective of understanding nuance and attempting to do what's right for each person, not just following his own agenda.
Exactly. And he takes himself out of it completely because he realizes the people are not his, the people are the Lord's, and that he doesn't want to mess up what God has. He wants to judge it correctly. And so he asks for discernment to understand good and evil, clean and unclean, holy and unholy, the things that our world is still striving against today. Does our world want any discernment? I should hear a resounding no, even though we're not Baptist here. I mean, it's just absolutely not. They do not want discernment. They don't want holiness. They want to merge the two. Good and evil, let's fuse them together. Holy and unholy, let's fuse them together. Clean and unclean, let's fuse it all together because it doesn't matter. They don't want it to matter. And that's why what he's asking for is so astounding. And what's the first case that comes before him, who is the Supreme Court? We're going to look at this in just 1 second. So this is the rest of the speech, and this is God's response to Solomon because he asked for discernment, which pleased him greatly. So our next reader, Kathy.
The speech pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this thing. Then God said to him, because you have asked this thing, and have not asked long life for yourself, nor have asked riches for yourself, nor have asked the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern justice, behold, I have done according to your words. See, I have given you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has not been anyone like you before you, nor shall any like you arise after you. And I have also given you what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be anyone like you among the kings all your days. So if you walk in my ways to keep my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days. And Solomon awoke, and indeed it had been a dream. And he came to Jerusalem and stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, offered up burnt offerings, offered peace offerings, and made a feast for all his servants.
Yep, it's an incredible speech that's here. But what is God moved by in Solomon's request? Exactly, Rob. That he didn't ask anything for himself. He asked to have this discernment and how to apply it. And he wrote so extensively. And at the end of this, he is blessed. And what does he do for his people? He makes a feast for everyone, all of his servants. And, I think that's just such a beautiful expression that he blessed them at the end of all of this. So now we come to this point. He's been given all this wisdom. He's been given all this discernment. His first major court case that he gets is between two prostitutes. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is the first case? Not like the Security and Exchange Commission, not, some big federal case. It's between two women who are prostitutes and about whose baby is it. And it's just like, wow, this seems like we've gone to the absolute bottom of the stack, something that should be judged by a local judge, and it's come all the way up to the king. But the news of this going throughout the kingdom is going to make the kingdom calm, because they will know this king has what? Wisdom and discernment. So are we going to risk misbehaving, risk something shadowy with him on the throne? It might be in their hearts, but they won't act on it. So can I get a reader for this one, verses 16 through 21?
Verse 16, now 2 women who were harlots came to the king and stood before him. And one woman said, "O my lord, this woman and I dwell in the same house, and I gave birth while she was in the house. Then it happened the 3rd day after I had given birth that this woman also gave birth, and we were together. No one was with us in the house except the 2 of us in the house. And this woman's son died in the night because she lay on him. So she arose in the middle of the night and took my son from my side while your maidservant slept, and laid him in her bosom, and laid her dead child in my bosom. And when I arose in the morning to nurse my son, there he was dead. But when I had examined him in the morning, indeed, he was not my son whom I had born."
Okay, so I never really thought about it before this class. What was the risk if the situation wasn't corrected here? The woman who slept with her child, I guess, crushed him, suffocated him, whatever, and he died, right? So she takes her dead baby, she gives it to the other woman, takes the live baby and puts it back with her. What's the risk if this woman who's really the mother doesn't act quickly? She's going to crush and kill a second baby. She's going to do the same thing that she did to the first, by accident, of course. And it's like, this is why it's so imperative that the real mother gets this baby back, because the first one didn't take care of business, and she was sloppy or whatever and just didn't do it. Next reader, Casey or Rob? There we go.
Then the other woman said, "No, but the living one is my son, and the dead one is your son." And the first woman said, "No, but the dead one is your son, and the living one is my son." Thus they spoke before the king, and the king said, "The one says, 'This is my son who lives, and your son is the dead one.' And the other says, 'No, but your son is the dead one, and my son is the living one.' Then the king said, 'Bring me a sword.' So they brought a sword before the king, and the king said, 'Divide the living child in two, and give half to one and half to the other.' Then the woman whose son was living spoke to the king, for she yearned with compassion for her son, and she said, 'O my lord, give her the living child, and by no means kill him.' But the other said, 'Let him neither be mine nor yours, but divide him.' So the king answered and said, 'Give the first woman the living child, and by no means kill him. She is his mother.' And all of Israel heard of the judgment which the king had rendered, and they feared the king, for they saw the wisdom of God was in him to administer justice."
So if you had set this out as a fairy tale and told it to people and say, how would you choose? There'd be a million different philosophies about how you should approach this and find out who the real mother was. And what I think is so brilliant about what Solomon says is he basically reiterates what both of the testimonies were, the plaintiff and the defendant, and then he says, bring me a sword. So he's applying a little bit of pressure to the situation to get some answers. And oh my goodness, the answers come out immediately. The real mother is revealed. The fake mother is revealed. And you find out where their loyalties really lie. Okay? So tell me what you get out of this as discernment that shook a kingdom. I mean, he was just given this power. He makes this one case between two prostitutes, and all he has to say is 4 words: bring me a sword. And the whole thing is cleared up. Yes?
I'm thinking, because I've always wondered, how did he know that was going to work? How did he know that the other one wasn't also going to say, no, 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 don't do that? He must have, I think, seen something in the way they were behaving prior to that.
I think it's also realistic that he was prepared to divide the child. Ultimately, I think if they hadn't revealed themselves,
You think that's what really would have happened?
he possibly. I mean, we don't know. But I think another word, it says that.
But then the king would have been guilty of murder in front of a public audience.
I don't know.
You got Leanne and you got Jesse. Yeah. Go ahead and give it to her real quick so they can hear the audience can hear.
No, it's just Jesus, it says he knew their hearts.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, this was the type of wisdom that he had been given, that he knew their hearts, and so he knew the answer would be revealed.
But this was a court case that hit the newsstand and went viral, as we say. Everybody was talking about this because they were like, wow, we're not going to get away with anything now. Did you get you to turn to say? You think he was bluffing? Okay, we got bluffing, we got kill the baby. What else we got? Go ahead, Randy.
God told Abraham to kill his son. So just the fact that Solomon said to do it didn't mean that he was ultimately going to do it. But he was prepared to do it, I guess.
Okay. All right. Yes. Stacy.
I think he knew human nature. He asked God for this wisdom, and he completely knew human nature. He knew the situation. He knew these women. He knew. He wasn't going to kill the baby. He had already asked God for this kind of discernment and wisdom, and it was given to him, and God said, I'm giving it to you because you asked for this.
Yeah.
Go forth and prosper with it. And he knew exactly what he was doing.
Yeah.
And it just goes to the heart of who we are as people.
Yes, it does. That's excellent. Thank you, Stacy.
I think to follow up what I was saying, I think he was prepared to do what he was asking for, but he also trusted God. So he had had this conversation with God. He trusted him, so he knew that God was involved in this, not just him, but God was helping to guide him.
Exactly.
So there was trust there.
And I wish we all had this wisdom for situations in our own lives and our own ecclesias. What I bring this up to you is because many times things split in churches, whole spiritual houses, because people force their own agenda on an ecclesia. We've certainly seen it in Virginia many different times. But to me, this is another allegory of splitting the baby is splitting the ecclesia. And I think a lot of times that's happening because a false mother is claiming the child. And I just want us to think about that, because this is going on even today, and I'll pick something external, okay? So in the news this week, the United Methodist Church split in half because of one major issue. What was it? And the BLT, XYZ, yeah. So it was women preachers, and it was also the situation with the LGBTQ stuff. So I just want to bring that up because it divided the meeting in more than one way. Nationally, it divided it. And there's many, many divisions. There's over, as far as Christianity goes, or religion in the United States, there's over 10,000 different religions in the United States. I'm like, how could you even come up with 10,000? But that's how it just keeps splitting and dividing. It's like something else that happens to a lot of people health-wise. Cancer. Cancer is what? It is the abnormal dividing of cells. That's exactly what this is, the abnormal dividing of cells. And it's a cancer that spreads because of strife and because nobody has discernment. They don't have the wisdom to stop it. Instead, the two prostitutes kick the king over and take over the whole country. And that's what's really going on. And it's an analogy for us, yes.
Sometimes there can be discernment, but not willingness to listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
So, we can choose to live in darkness, even if we've seen the light. We can choose darkness. That's our comfort zone.
Exactly.
It's what we know.
So I just think this wisdom is extremely important for us as believers, because if we don't have this discernment, if we model ourselves and pattern ourselves and cast ourselves after the model of this world, that is the beginning of the end for us as a community. And to stand apart takes tremendous courage. I don't even know if I've got it. You've got to. So just going to take a moment to talk about Naomi and Ruth. She's the one who says, "Don't let me leave you. I will die when you die, and there will be buried." And it says, all right. So with Naomi and Ruth, I just want to show that Ruth has discernment and she knows where to go. Yes.
There was a time with Barnabas and John Mark and Paul, and it says Barnabas wanted to take John Mark with them, and Paul insisted that they shouldn't take him along since he had deserted them in Pamphylia and hadn't continued with them in their work. Their argument became so intense that they went their separate ways. Barnabas took Mark and sailed to Cyprus, and Paul chose Silas and left and entrusted by the brothers and sisters to the Lord's grace. sometimes you can separate and say, I'm going to take this person and we're going to do God's work.
Yeah.
And somebody says, I'm going to take this guy over here and we're going to do God's work.
Right.
And we maybe don't see eye to eye right now. They came back together, and John Mark ended up being, okay. He continued, he did better as he grew in grace and love and all that. And Barnabas helped him
Get there.
So sometimes you can separate and do good work when you have a different mission, I think.
Or a different mentor. Because Paul did a great job with Onesimus. He was worthless at the beginning and he turned him around. But for whatever reason, he couldn't work with John Mark, so Barnabas did. So that's great. But the point is, to all that, I think that there is resolution and it brings it back together. So thank you for that. So we talked about Jacob and his sons, and judging rightly his family, and Eli and his sons, and David and his family, and now we're going to look at Naomi and Ruth. She urges her, I don't want to leave you because I want to follow and learn from you. Basically, she wants Naomi as a mentor, so she stops urging her. So I just wanted to bring out, I'm not going to read these, but there's a lot of structural damage that's being done. We love that there are so many people at youth camp. It warms our heart. We're grateful when the youth are at camp. We're grateful that we have so many Sunday schools. Are we aware of what they're facing in schools? Are we aware that all the work we're doing one day a week, they're undoing 5 days a week under their influence? It's very sobering. And you can read these on your own. I'm not going to read them, but there's just a lot going on in the world that is taking the place of family and parenting. In some states, if you don't agree with your child's decision on their gender or orientation, the child can be taken away and given to another family by the state. So I'm sorry? Okay, all right. Yeah, go ahead.
This is from 2013 in New York City.
10 years ago.
Yeah. Conservatives are outraged after MSNBC host Melissa Harris Perry ran a public service announcement telling viewers of the left-leaning network that children belong to whole communities, not their parents. The 30-second spot was apparently intended to promote increased spending on education, but many conservative observers objected to its collectivist, anti-family flavor. We have to break through our kind of private idea that kids belong to their parents or kids belong to their families and recognize that kids belong to whole communities, Harris Perry said in the ad. Once we recognize it's everybody's responsibility and not just the households, then we start making better investments. The ad was recorded ahead of the predicted release of President Barack Obama's proposed budget, which was expected to contain new tax hikes to fund universal preschool for American 4-year-olds.
Okay, so this was 10 years ago. It's old news, but a lot more has happened since then. This is a decade-old information. So and this forcing of kids to go to public schools and to get the new iteration of what the teachers in the educational systems want is being mandated. And that's the fear to us. We have them 1 day a week on Sundays, unless you're doing things with your families at home during the week. And they have 5 days of influence of their friends and their teachers and the educational systems teaching them something completely different. And they're being forced to choose when they are, as a little child, not knowing how to go out or come in, just like Solomon said, and wondering, how are we going to deal with this? It's gotten so extreme. We know about the Heritage School out in California in Simi Valley, that they've started their own because you know how the situation is in California. And I'm like, we need to do this here because what our kids are subjected to is horrendous. And if we don't somehow pull them out of that environment, who's going to win? Them or God? And it's just to me, it's very frightening because these are just more articles talking about how the state is saying, well, if you don't agree with us, then we're going to cut you off. And that could certainly happen to our ecclesia. That can happen to any spiritual body where they say, hey, you're not following the political line here of supporting this lifestyle, so we're going to make you start paying taxes. We're going to confiscate property if you don't do what we tell you to do. And that day is coming, and it's like we can yawn and say it's not my responsibility. I don't have any kids. It's not my responsibility. But I don't know what the current statistics are now. But I mean, you know, I even talked with Ruth's husband. His name went right out of my head. Say it again. Jason Henley, about at least showing us the model of what they're doing, and they said they finally came into their stride last year, and now they've got a really level path for how they're doing it. Yes, Jessica. 3 to 4% has gone up for homeschooling. Okay, so this is towards the end of it.
Just a quick observation. I think those of us that are my age grew up, when we were in school, the first thing we did in the morning was say the Lord's Prayer.
Okay.
Of course, there was a Pledge of Allegiance part of that, but we said the Lord's Prayer, the whole school. And now the first thing they did was take prayer out of schools, and you think, well, that's it, but that's just the beginning, and how much it's changed in one generation.
Jesse has a better chart.
Around 2000, it was about 2%. In 2020, it's 4%. So it's doubled in 20 years.
So I'm not quite finished, Jason, but last week should be the final week. Will that